Hashtag primitive weapons, they said, until a human sniper entered the room. Hashtag Part 1. The Galactic Council's war room buzzed with a low hum of advanced technology and hushed conversations in dozens of alien languages. Holographic displays floated throughout the massive chamber, showing tactical readouts, fleet positions, and casualty reports from the ongoing conflict with the Zephyrian Empire. Commander Vextai of the Altarian Defense Force stood before the central command console, his 6 arms working simultaneously across multiple interfaces while his compound eyes tracked numerous data streams. Status report on the Kepler 442b defense grid. Vextai commanded, his translator converting his chittering language into standard galactic. Grid compromised, Commander, responded Lieutenant Zura, a Centaurian whose blue-scaled skin shimmered under the chamber's artificial lighting. Zephyrian plasma bombardment has breached sectors 7 through 12. Estimated time until complete grid failure is 14 standard hours. Vextai's mandibles clicked in frustration. Kepler 442b was a crucial agricultural world, feeding nearly half the systems in this sector. Its loss would cripple the Allied food supply chain and potentially force dozens of worlds to surrender rather than face starvation. What about reinforcements from the Proxima fleet? Asked General Karath, a towering draconian whose reptilian features were scarred from countless battles. 48 hours minimum, Zara replied, her head tentacles swaying with stress pheromones. The Zephyrians have interdiction fields throughout the system. Our ships would have to take the long route through the Veil Nebula. The room fell into a tense silence. Every being present understood the mathematics of war, and these numbers didn't add up to victory. Kepler 442b would fall, and with it, the entire sector's defensive line. Sir, a young Altarian communications officer interrupted from his station. We're receiving a transmission from Kepler 442b. It's from Colonel Sarachun of the Terran Expeditionary Force. The mention of humans caused several beings in the room to exchange glances. Earth had only joined the Galactic Council 18 months ago, and their military contributions had been modest. The humans insisted on using chemically propelled projectile weapons while the rest of the galaxy had moved to energy-based systems centuries ago. Their tactics seemed crude, their technology primitive, and their soldiers were considered useful only for basic infantry support. Put her through, Vextai ordered, though his tone suggested he didn't expect much from the communication. The holographic display shimmered and resolved into the image of a human female in her 40s. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her brown eyes held a steady, calm intensity that seemed unusual given the circumstances. Behind her, explosions lit up the night sky, and the distant sound of weapons fire could be heard through the transmission. Commander Vextai, Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly despite the chaos around her. I'm requesting permission to implement an unconventional defensive strategy. Colonel Chun, Vextai replied, struggling to hide his skepticism. Our tactical computers have run every possible scenario. Without reinforcements, Kepler 442b cannot be held. I recommend immediate evacuation of all essential personnel. Sarah's expression didn't change. With respect, Commander, your tactical computers may not have accounted for human methodology. We've identified a vulnerability in the Zephyrian assault pattern. General Karath leaned forward, his golden eyes narrowing. Colonel, the Zephyrians have been perfecting siege warfare for over 3,000 years. They've conquered 17 star systems using these exact tactics. What could primitive human weapons possibly accomplish that our advanced arsenal cannot? For the first time, Sarah smiled, and something in that expression made several beings in the war room feel unexpectedly uneasy. General, you're absolutely right about Zephyrian tactics. They're perfect, refined, and utterly predictable. Their command structure follows a rigid hierarchy. Their assault patterns are mathematically precise, and their commanders direct operations from mobile command centers that maintain specific distances from frontline positions. She paused as another explosion illuminated her position. The problem with perfection, gentlemen, is that it creates patterns, and patterns create opportunities. What are you proposing? Vextai asked, his curiosity overriding his skepticism. The Zephyrian Command Center is currently positioned 4.7 kilometers from their main assault line, well beyond the range of any energy weapon in their arsenal or ours. It's a mobile fortress with shields that could deflect anything we can throw at it. Sarah's smile widened. Except they're not accounting for ballistic trajectories. The war room erupted in a mixture of confused clicking, hissing, and other alien expressions of disbelief. Colonel, Zara interjected, energy weapons travel at light speed and can penetrate most known shielding. How could your projectile weapons possibly be more effective? Because, Sarah replied, Zephyrian shields are designed to deflect energy. They create electromagnetic barriers that redirect plasma, laser, and ion attacks. But they don't stop physical objects moving at high velocity. She gestured to someone off-screen, and the transmission's perspective shifted to show a human soldier in camouflage gear lying prone behind a rocky outcropping. He was positioned behind what appeared to be an oversized version of the primitive rifles humans were known to use, though this one had an enormously long barrel and complex optical attachments. This is Sergeant Marcus Webb, Sarah continued. He's what we call a designated marksman, specialized in extreme long-range precision shooting. That weapon is a .50 caliber anti-material rifle, modified for vacuum operations and equipped with computational targeting systems. Webb looked up from his scope briefly, offering a casual wave to the transmission before returning to his weapon. The Zephyrian Command Center has a single point of vulnerability, Sarah explained. Their commander, Marshal Thackmore, personally oversees all tactical decisions from an observation deck. He's visible for approximately 30 seconds every 12 minutes when the command center rotates to assess different battle sectors. Vextai's compound eyes widened as he began to understand the audacity of what the human was proposing. Colonel, you're suggesting that a single soldier, using a primitive ballistic weapon, can eliminate a target at nearly 5 kilometers distance through active battlefield conditions. Not suggesting, Commander. Confirming. Sarah's voice carried absolute confidence. Sergeant Webb has successfully engaged targets at ranges exceeding 6 kilometers under similar conditions. The Zephyrians don't even know he exists. The war room fell silent except for the soft humming of electronics. The concept was so foreign, so seemingly impossible by galactic standards, that most beings present were struggling to process it. Even if such a shot were possible, General Karath said slowly, killing one commander wouldn't stop the assault. The Zephyrians have established chain of command protocols. You're absolutely right, Sarah agreed, which is why we won't be stopping at one shot. The transmission angle shifted again, revealing that Webb was not alone. Scattered across the rocky terrain at various concealed positions were dozens of other human soldiers, each equipped with similar weapons and all focused on different sectors of the Zephyrian forces. The Zephyrians operate under a highly centralized command structure, Sarah continued her briefing. Each tactical division requires real-time coordination from specific commanders positioned at precise intervals throughout their formation. They've never encountered an enemy capable of simultaneously targeting multiple command elements beyond visual range. She pointed to a holographic display that appeared next to her image, showing a tactical breakdown of the Zephyrian assault force. Red indicators mark the positions of various command elements, each well protected by conventional standards, but all potentially vulnerable to high-velocity projectile weapons. Our plan is simple, Sarah explained. At precisely 0300 local time, when the Zephyrian night shift rotation occurs and their detection systems cycle through diagnostic routines, 43 human marksmen will simultaneously eliminate every command element in the assault force. The audacity of the plan was breathtaking. Vextai found himself recalculating the mathematics involved. 43 simultaneous shots across a battlefield spanning dozens of square kilometers, each requiring perfect timing, precise calculation of environmental factors, and flawless execution. The environmental variables alone. Zara began, her tentacles writhing with stress. Wind patterns, atmospheric density fluctuations, gravitational variations. Already calculated. Webb's voice came through the transmission as he made minute adjustments to his weapon. Been mapping conditions for the past 6 hours. Each position has been surveyed, range tested, and calibrated. But the Zephyrians will detect your muzzle flashes, protested Commander Vextai. Their thermal sensors will identify your positions immediately after the first shot. Sarah nodded, which is why we'll only need one shot each. After eliminating the command structure, the Zephyrian forces will be operating without coordination. Their individual units are trained to follow orders, not make independent tactical decisions. They'll continue their assigned assault patterns, but without unified command, those patterns become predictable and exploitable. She gestured to another section of the tactical display. Once command and control is disrupted, our conventional forces can exploit the confusion. The Zephyrians will retreat to defensive positions to await new orders that will never come. The communication crackled with static as another explosion shook Sarah's position. When the image stabilized, her expression remained calm and focused. "Commander, I need authorization to proceed. We have a window of approximately 40 minutes before optimal conditions expire." Vextai found himself facing an impossible decision. Every tactical algorithm, every strategic computer model, every piece of conventional military wisdom indicated that Kepler 442b was lost. The humans' plan seemed so outrageous, so dependent on individual skill rather than technological superiority, that it challenged fundamental assumptions about modern warfare. Yet something in Sarah's unwavering confidence, in the casual competence of the soldier called Webb, suggested that perhaps human military capabilities had been significantly underestimated. "Colonel," Vextai said slowly, "what you're proposing contradicts everything we know about contemporary battle doctrine." "Yes, sir, it does," Sarah replied. "The question is whether you're willing to trust primitive human methods when advanced technology has failed." The war room waited in tense silence as Vextai processed the decision. Around him, the most advanced military minds in the galaxy watched and waited, each knowing that the next few words would determine the fate of not just one world, but potentially the entire sector. Through the transmission, the sound of Zephyrian artillery grew closer, and the time for theoretical debate was rapidly running out. Hashtag primitive weapons, they said, until a human sniper entered the room. Hashtag part 2. The silence in the Galactic Council's war room stretched for what felt like an eternity. Commander Vextai's compound eyes flickered between the tactical displays showing Kepler 442b's deteriorating defenses and the steady gaze of Colonel Sarah Chun. Every conventional military algorithm screamed that her plan was impossible, yet something in the human's calm certainty made him hesitate. "Authorization granted," Vextai finally announced, his words sending ripples of surprise through the assembled officers. "But, Colonel, understand that if this fails—" "It won't fail," Sarah interrupted with quiet confidence. "Webb, initiate Operation Longshot. All teams, final equipment checks, and range confirmations." Through the transmission, the war room observers could see human soldiers across the battlefield making last-minute adjustments to their weapons. Each marksman worked with methodical precision, their movements economical and practiced. These weren't the desperate actions of soldiers facing impossible odds, but the calm preparations of professionals executing a well-rehearsed plan. Sergeant Webb's voice came through the communication system as he performed his final checks. Wind speed holding steady at 3.2 meters per second from the northeast. Atmospheric pressure stable. Temperature dropping 2 degrees, compensating for trajectory variance. Sarah nodded and turned back to the transmission. "Commander, I'm transferring our tactical overview to your systems. You'll be able to monitor each target simultaneously." The war room's main display suddenly populated with 43 separate video feeds, each showing a different perspective of the Zephyrian assault force through the scopes of human rifles. The level of detail was stunning, revealing individual Zephyrian officers directing operations from positions they clearly believed were secure. "Impossible," whispered Lieutenant Zara, her blue scales shimmering with disbelief. The magnification required for that level of detail at such ranges. "Human optical technology is more advanced than our initial assessments indicated," General Karath admitted grudgingly. "But magnification alone isn't sufficient. The atmospheric distortion, the micro-vibrations from artillery impacts, the thermal variations, all accounted for," came Webb's calm voice. "We've been preparing for this type of engagement since humans first looked up at the stars and wondered what was out there." Sarah added context to Webb's statement. Humans have been perfecting long-range precision shooting for over 8 centuries. We've developed techniques for engaging targets under conditions that would challenge your most advanced targeting computers. Wind reading, ballistic calculation, environmental compensation. These are skills we've refined through necessity. She gestured toward the tactical display. Every marksman in this operation has successfully engaged targets beyond 5 kilometers in Earth's variable atmosphere conditions. Kepler 442b's thinner atmosphere and lower gravity actually make these shots easier than our training standards. Commander Vextai studied the feeds, noting how each human soldier seemed to be tracking their target with an almost predatory patience. Colonel, explain your targeting methodology. How are you coordinating 43 simultaneous shots across such a dispersed battlefield? Each marksman has been assigned specific targets based on their position and optimal shooting angles, Sarah explained. We've created a cascade elimination sequence. Primary command elements first, followed by secondary coordinators, then tertiary support officers. The entire Zephyrian command structure will collapse within a 30-second window. Webb's voice interrupted from his position. Target acquired. Marshal Thacmore's observation deck is beginning its rotation cycle. 28 minutes until optimal firing position. Through Webb's scope feed, the war room could see the massive Zephyrian command center slowly rotating. The structure was enormous, easily the size of a small city, bristling with defensive weapons and surrounded by energy shields that shimmered like heat mirages. At its apex, a crystalline observation deck provided a panoramic view of the battlefield. The Marshal will be visible for exactly 31 seconds during the rotation, Sarah explained. Long enough for positive identification and target acquisition, but short enough that he believes himself secure. What about the shields surrounding the command center? Asked Zura, her tentacles writhing with nervous energy. Sarah smiled, that same unsettling expression from earlier. Energy shields are designed to stop energy. A .50 caliber tungsten core projectile traveling 850 meters per second is a kinetic force, not an energy weapon. The shields will detect it too late to react. The observation deck continued its slow rotation, and through the scope feeds, the war room could see other Zephyrian commanders at their respective positions. Each was surrounded by elaborate defensive systems, protected by technology that represented thousands of years of military advancement. None of them appear to have any awareness that death was stalking them from positions beyond their conceptual understanding of battlefield engagement ranges. 15 minutes to optimal firing window, Webb announced. All teams report ready status. Sarah turned to address the war room directly. Commanders, what you're about to witness represents a fundamental difference in human military philosophy. While galactic warfare has evolved toward technological complexity and energy-based systems, humans have maintained and perfected kinetic warfare principles. She paused to check a handheld device. Our weapons may appear primitive by your standards, but they're based on physics that remain constant regardless of technological advancement. Kinetic energy equals 1/2 mass times velocity squared. No shield technology in the galaxy can alter that fundamental equation. But surely, protested General Karath, energy weapons are superior in every measurable way. Rate of fire, ammunition capacity, effective range. Energy weapons are indeed superior for most applications, Sarah agreed. But they have one critical vulnerability. They're detectable and defendable. Every energy weapon signature can be analyzed, predicted, and countered. Kinetic weapons, particularly single-shot precision systems, are nearly impossible to defend against once fired. Webb's voice carried a note of anticipation. 10 minutes to firing window. Atmospheric conditions remain stable. All targets maintaining predicted positions. Through the multiple scope feeds, the war room could observe the intricate dance of Zephyrian military operations. Commanders moved between positions with clockwork precision, following tactical doctrines that had proven successful across countless campaigns. Their certainty in their own security was absolute, and why shouldn't it be? No weapon in the galactic arsenal could reach them at these ranges through their defensive systems. 5 minutes to optimal window, Webb announced. Beginning final range calculations. Sarah's expression grew more serious. Commanders, I want you to understand something about human military culture. We don't engage in warfare lightly, but when we commit to action, we commit completely. What you're about to witness isn't just marksmanship. It's the application of centuries of human military evolution. The scope feeds showed each human marksman making microscopic adjustments to their weapons. These weren't random movements, but precise corrections based on real-time environmental assessment. Wind speed, humidity, gravitational variations, even the rotation of the planet beneath them. All factors were being calculated and compensated for in real time. 2 minutes to firing window. Webb's voice remained perfectly calm despite the magnitude of what he was about to attempt. Marshal Thacmore's observation deck approaching optimal visibility angle. Commander Vextai found himself leaning forward, his multiple arms gripping the command console. Around the war room, every being present watched the displays with absolute focus. They were about to witness either a spectacular failure or a demonstration that would fundamentally alter their understanding of human military capabilities. 1 minute to firing window. All teams report final ready status. The Zephyrian Command Center continued its rotation, bringing Marshal Thacmore's observation deck into increasingly clear view. Through Webb's scope, they could see the Marshal himself, a towering figure in ornate armor, directing the assault with confident gestures. 30 seconds to optimal firing position, Webb announced. Wind steady, atmospheric pressure stable, target tracking nominal. Sarah turned to the war room, transmission one final time. Commanders, regardless of what your tactical computers predict, trust in human determination. We've been preparing for challenges like this since we first learned to fashion tools and hunt prey. What you consider primitive, we consider proven. 15 seconds to firing window. Webb's voice carried the focused calm of a predator about to strike. Target visibility approaching optimal parameters. Through all 43 scope feeds, the war room could see Zephyrian commanders going about their duties, completely unaware that their existence was measured in seconds. The contrast was striking. Advanced alien technology and sophisticated tactics about to be defeated by what appear to be simple mechanical weapons and human skill. 10 seconds to firing window. Webb continued his countdown. Target acquiring optimal visibility. Range confirmed at 4,847 meters. The Marshal's observation deck rotated into perfect view, the crystalline structure providing an unobstructed line of sight. Through the scope, Marshal Thacmore was clearly visible, his attention focused entirely on the tactical displays before him. 5 seconds to firing window. Target locked. Range confirmed. Environmental factors calculated. Commander Vextai held his breath, as did every being in the war room. 43 separate feeds showed 43 different Zephyrian officers, each about to discover that their understanding of modern warfare was fatally incomplete. Firing window optimal. Taking the shot. Webb's scope barely moved as he pressed the trigger, but through the feed, they could see the massive rifle recoil despite its advanced stabilization systems. The projectile, invisible to the naked eye, crossed nearly 5 kilometers of battlefield in less than 6 seconds. Marshal Thacmore's observation deck suddenly exploded in a shower of crystalline fragments and atmospheric decompression. The Marshal himself simply vanished, eliminated so quickly that his body barely had time to register the impact. Simultaneously, across all 43 feeds, similar scenes played out as human marksmen eliminated their targets with surgical precision. Zephyrian commanders who had been confidently directing operations suddenly ceased to exist, their positions erupting in brief flashes of kinetic destruction. The war room fell into stunned silence as the scope feeds showed the immediate aftermath. Zephyrian communication networks erupted in confusion as field units tried to contact commanders who would never respond again. The precisely coordinated assault began to falter as individual units waited for orders that would never come. Sarah's smile returned as she surveyed the results. Operation Longshot complete. All primary targets eliminated. Secondary objectives proceeding as planned. But even as the words left her lips, the scope feeds began detecting movement throughout the Zephyrian forces. The elimination of their command structure had created exactly the chaos Sarah had predicted, but the response was beginning to unfold in ways that would challenge even human adaptability. Hashtag primitive weapons, they said, until a human sniper entered the room. Hashtag part 3. The aftermath of Operation Longshot was visible across every tactical display in the Galactic Council's war room. Zephyrian communication channels erupted with frantic status requests and increasingly desperate attempts to contact eliminated commanders. The precisely orchestrated assault that had been steadily grinding through Kepler 442b's defenses now resembled a confused mass of individual units operating without coordination. Commander Vextai watched the displays in stunned fascination as Sarah Chen's prediction began to manifest with terrifying accuracy. Zephyrian forces, trained for thousands of years to follow hierarchical command structures, found themselves paralyzed by the sudden absence of leadership. "Remarkable," Lieutenant Zura whispered, her blue scales flickering with involuntary bioluminescence patterns that indicated extreme excitement. "Their entire tactical framework is collapsing." "Not collapsing," Sarah corrected through the transmission, her voice carrying a note of professional satisfaction. "Reverting to base programming." Zephyrian military doctrine emphasizes obedience and precision over individual initiative. Without commanders to issue new orders, each unit will continue executing their last received instructions regardless of changing battlefield conditions. Through web scope, they could observe Zephyrian infantry units maintaining their assault positions even as their support elements began withdrawing in confusion. Artillery batteries continued firing at pre-designated coordinates despite the fact that enemy positions had shifted hours ago. It was simultaneously impressive and tragic, a demonstration of military discipline that had become a fatal weakness. "How long before they adapt?" General Karath asked, his reptilian features showing grudging respect for the human strategy. "That's the beauty of rigid hierarchical systems," Sarah replied. "They don't adapt quickly. Zephyrian field officers are trained to await orders from their superiors. With their command structure eliminated, they'll maintain defensive positions and try to re-establish communication with their high command." She gestured to a tactical display showing Zephyrian fleet positions in orbit around Kepler 442b. Unfortunately, their fleet commanders are already beginning to realize what happened. "We estimate approximately 2 hours before they reorganize and implement emergency command protocols." Webb's voice interrupted from his position. "Colonel, detecting increased thermal signatures from multiple Zephyrian positions. Looks like they're beginning to triangulate our firing positions." Sarah nodded, unsurprised by this development. "Understood, Sergeant. All sniper teams, initiate displacement protocol. Move to secondary positions and await further instructions." Through the scope feeds, the war room could observe human marksmen beginning to pack their weapons with efficient movements. These weren't panicked retreats, but coordinated withdrawals executed with the same precision as their initial shots. "Colonel," Commander Vextai interjected, "surely the Zephyrians will now implement countermeasures against your sniping tactics. Your advantage appears to be temporary." Sarah's expression grew more serious. "You're absolutely correct, Commander, which is why Phase 2 of our operation begins now." The tactical displays suddenly populated with new information as Sarah transmitted additional data to the war room. Instead of showing static defensive positions, the displays now revealed dozens of small human teams moving rapidly across the battlefield using routes that avoided Zephyrian detection systems. While our marksmen were eliminating command elements, our assault teams were infiltrating Zephyrian rear positions, Sarah explained. Conventional galactic warfare focuses on massive frontal engagements, with technological superiority determining victory. Human tactics emphasize mobility, adaptation, and exploiting enemy weaknesses. Lieutenant Zara studied the new tactical information with growing amazement. These infiltration routes, they pass directly through areas our computers classified as impossible to traverse undetected. Your computers assume detection systems designed to identify energy signatures and technological emissions, Sarah replied. Human infiltration techniques rely on terrain utilization, environmental camouflage, and movement patterns that don't trigger automated sensors. She highlighted several positions on the display. Zephyrian defensive systems are optimized to detect vehicles, energy weapons, and electronic emissions. They're not designed to identify small groups of soldiers moving on foot using natural cover and electromagnetic silence. Webb's voice came through the transmission again, now from a new position several hundred meters from his original firing point. Colonel, Zephyrian thermal sweeps are focusing on our previous positions. No indication they've detected our current locations. Excellent, Sergeant. Begin Phase 2 target acquisition. Priority targets are communication arrays and supply depots. The scope feeds shifted to show new targets throughout the Zephyrian positions. Instead of command personnel, the human marksmen were now focusing on critical infrastructure elements. Communication dishes, power generators, ammunition storage facilities, and fuel depots appeared in the crosshairs of human weapons. General Karath leaned forward, his golden eyes narrowing as he studied the target selection. You're attempting to further disrupt their ability to reorganize by eliminating their logistical support. Precisely, Sarah confirmed. Zephyrian forces are highly dependent on sophisticated supply chains and communication networks. Their weapons require specialized ammunition, their vehicles need specific fuel types, and their equipment depends on constant maintenance support. She pointed to one of the scope feeds, showing a massive supply depot protected by energy barriers. By eliminating their logistical infrastructure, we force them to operate on whatever supplies they currently possess. Most Zephyrian units carry approximately 6 hours of combat supplies under normal operational parameters. But those supply depots are heavily shielded, protested Zura. Even if your kinetic weapons can penetrate the barriers, surely the explosions will alert them to your positions. Sarah smiled, that unsettling expression again. Lieutenant, you're thinking in terms of direct destruction. Human tactics are more subtle. Webb's voice provided clarification. Target acquired on primary fuel distribution manifold. Single shot to the pressure release valve should create a cascading system failure without major explosions. Through his scope feed, the war room could see an intricate network of pipes and valves that comprise the Zephyrian fuel distribution system. It was a marvel of engineering designed to efficiently supply thousands of vehicles and weapons systems across the battlefield. Human engineering analysis identified 17 critical failure points in their supply network, Sarah explained. Strategic damage to specific components will cause system-wide failures that appear to be mechanical malfunctions rather than enemy action. Webb made minute adjustments to his aim, targeting what appeared to be a simple valve assembly among hundreds of similar components. Firing solution calculated. Taking the shot in 3, 2, 1. The rifle recoiled, and 6 seconds later, a small puff of vaporized metal indicated impact. Initially, nothing seemed to happen. Then, slowly, fuel lines throughout the depot began experiencing pressure drops as the distribution system attempted to compensate for the damaged valve. Brilliant, whispered Commander Vextai as he watched the cascading failure propagate through the Zephyrian supply network. It appears to be a random mechanical failure. Exactly the point, Sarah replied. Zephyrian maintenance protocols require specific authorization codes and replacement parts to repair their systems. Without their command structure, those authorizations can't be issued. Across all 43 scope feeds, similar scenes were playing out as human marksmen targeted critical infrastructure components with surgical precision. Communication arrays developed mysterious signal degradation. Power generators began experiencing unexplained efficiency losses, and supply conveyors started suffering from what appeared to be routine mechanical failures. The beauty of this approach, Sarah continued, is that each individual failure seems insignificant. Zephyrian field officers will assume these are normal mechanical issues that can be addressed during routine maintenance cycles. But cumulatively, General Karath realized, his voice carrying new respect for human tactical thinking, these failures will cripple their entire operational capability. Within 4 hours, Sarah confirmed, Zephyrian forces will be operating at approximately 40% combat effectiveness due to what appears to be coincidental equipment failures. Their officers will be requesting maintenance support that can't be provided because their command structure no longer exists. Webb's voice interrupted with a new observation. Colonel, detecting movement from Zephyrian orbital positions. Looks like their fleet is beginning to deploy additional assets. Sarah checked her tactical displays and nodded. Confirmed, Sergeant. 3 destroyer-class vessels are moving to low orbit, probably preparing to provide direct fire support to compensate for ground-based communication failures. Commander Vextai, felt a moment of concern. Colonel, orbital bombardment could neutralize your tactical advantage. Your soldiers can't engage targets in space. For the first time since the operation began, Sarah's expression showed something approaching amusement. Commander, you're absolutely right that we can't shoot at spaceships from the ground. But we don't need to. She gestured to her tactical display, which now showed new information about the descending Zephyrian vessels. Those destroyers are moving to low orbit to provide close fire support, which means they need to establish communication links with ground forces to coordinate targeting. And those communication links, General Karath realized with growing amazement, will be vulnerable to the same disruption tactics you've been using against ground-based infrastructure. Precisely. Phase 3 of our operation targets the communication relays that enable orbital fire support coordination. Without those links, the destroyers will be reduced to area bombardment, which Zephyrian doctrine prohibits in proximity to their own forces. Sarah's confidence remained unshaken despite the escalating complexity of the battlefield. Commanders, you've spent centuries developing warfare around technological superiority and massive resource deployment. Humans learned to fight when we had nothing but sharpened sticks and the ability to think creatively. She paused as another explosion lit up the sky behind her position. Every challenge you consider insurmountable is simply another problem requiring an innovative solution. The Zephyrians brought superior technology and overwhelming force. We brought something they never expected to encounter: unpredictability. The war room fell silent as the implications of Sarah's words settled over the assembled officers. They were witnessing not just a successful military operation, but a fundamental demonstration of how different approaches to warfare could achieve victory against seemingly impossible odds. Through the scope feeds, Zephyrian forces continued their confused attempts to maintain operational capability as their infrastructure systematically failed around them. And, high above, 3 destroyer-class vessels descended toward a trap they couldn't possibly anticipate. #primitive weapons, they said, until a human sniper entered the room. Part 4. The 3 Zephyrian destroyers descended through Kepler 442b's atmosphere with the confidence of predators approaching helpless prey. Each vessel was over 800 meters long, bristling with plasma cannons and shielded by energy barriers that could deflect anything in the galactic arsenal. Their crews had conquered dozens of worlds using these exact tactics, and their commanders saw no reason why this engagement should prove any different. In the war room, Commander Vextai watched the orbital display with growing concern. Colonel Chun, those destroyers carry enough firepower to level continents. Even if your tactics have disrupted ground operations, orbital bombardment will render all previous gains meaningless. Sarah's image remained calm despite the massive warships approaching her position. Commander, you're absolutely right about their destructive capability, but you're assuming they'll be able to use it effectively. She gestured to a new tactical display showing the communication networks that connected Zephyrian ground forces with their orbital assets. Those destroyers need real-time targeting data from ground-based forward observers to avoid hitting their own forces. Without that coordination, they're reduced to area bombardment, which Zephyrian military doctrine specifically prohibits when friendly forces are present. Webb's voice crackled through the transmission from his new position. Colonel, I have visual on the primary ground-to-orbit communication array. It's a big target, but it's positioned behind their main defensive line. Distance and conditions, Sergeant. 6,200 meters through variable atmospheric conditions. Wind is gusting unpredictably due to thermal effects from the orbital approach. It's a challenging shot even by our standards. General Karath studied the tactical information with professional interest. Sergeant Webb, that communication array is protected by multiple defensive systems. Even if you could hit it at that range, surely the defensive barriers would absorb the impact. Webb's response carried the quiet confidence that had become his trademark. General, you're thinking about energy-based defenses again. The array itself is protected, but the physical support structure isn't. Sometimes the best way to destroy a target isn't to hit it directly. Through Webb's scope feed, the war room could see the massive communication array dominating the landscape. It was indeed an impressive target. A crystalline structure nearly 50 meters tall, surrounded by energy shields and defensive weapon emplacements. Hitting it directly would be impossible even for human weapons. But Webb wasn't aiming at the array itself. His scope was focused on a much smaller target, a series of support cables that anchored the structure against Kepler 442b's frequent windstorms. Structural engineering analysis indicates that severing 3 specific support cables will create cascade failure in the entire support network, Sarah explained. The array will collapse under its own weight without any indication of enemy action. But the precision required. Lieutenant Zara's tentacles writhed with stress as she calculated the mathematics involved. Those cables are less than 10 centimeters in diameter at extreme range through atmospheric distortion caused by orbital ship exhaust. Actually, Webb interrupted, the ship exhaust is helping. It's creating thermal updrafts that are reducing atmospheric distortion along my firing line. Sometimes environmental challenges become environmental advantages if you adapt properly. Sarah nodded approvingly. That's the essence of human tactical thinking, Lieutenant. We don't fight environment. We use it. Every challenge contains the seeds of opportunity if you're creative enough to find them. The first Zephyrian destroyer settled into low orbit directly above the battlefield, its massive bulk blotting out stars as it maneuvered into position. Immediately, ground forces began attempting to establish targeting links with the orbital platform. They're trying to coordinate fire support, Webb observed. I could see their ground teams setting up targeting equipment. Estimate 12 minutes before they achieve communication lock. Understood, Sergeant. Take your shots when ready. Webb made microscopic adjustments to his weapon, accounting for the complex environmental variables created by having a massive starship hovering overhead. The thermal effects, gravitational distortions, and electromagnetic interference would challenge even the most advanced targeting computers. Yet he was calculating these factors manually using techniques developed over centuries of human military evolution. First shot, primary support cable, firing now. The rifle recoiled, and the war room watched through his scope as the projectile crossed over 6 kilometers of battlefield in less than 7 seconds. The impact was barely visible, just a tiny spark as tungsten core met advanced alloy cable. But the effect was immediately apparent as structural stress began redistributing throughout the array's support network. Direct hit on primary support. Beginning calculation for second target. The second cable was positioned at a different angle, requiring Webb to adjust not just for distance and environmental factors, but also for the changing stress loads as the array began compensating for the damage support. Second shot, secondary support cable, firing now. Again, the distant impact was barely visible, but the array's movement became more pronounced as 2/3 of its primary support structure failed. Warning lights began flashing around the base of the structure as Zephyrian engineers detected the stress anomalies. They're noticing the structural problems, Sarah observed, but they're interpreting it as material fatigue, not enemy action. Zephyrian engineering protocols assume that any significant damage would involve massive energy signatures. Webb was already calculating his final shot. The third support cable was the most challenging target, partially obscured by the array structure itself, and subject to increasing vibration as the entire assembly became unstable. Third shot, tertiary support cable. This one's tricky due to structural oscillation, but I got a firing solution. The third shot required perfect timing as Webb waited for the oscillating structure to present the optimal angle. When he fired, the projectile followed a trajectory that threaded between structural elements to strike the final support cable with devastating precision. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The massive communication array, deprived of its primary structural support, began a slow-motion collapse that took nearly 30 seconds to complete. The crystalline structure shattered into millions of fragments as it struck the ground, destroying not just the array itself, but also the backup communication equipment positioned around its base. Communication array eliminated, Webb reported with professional satisfaction. Ground-to-orbit coordination capability has been terminated. Almost immediately, the war room's displays showed the Zephyrian response. Ground units began frantically attempting to establish alternative communication methods, while the orbital destroyer crews found themselves unable to receive targeting data from below. The second and third destroyers are beginning their descent, Sarah reported, watching her tactical displays. But without communication links, they'll be operating blind. Their commanders are trained to avoid fratricidal fire, so they'll maintain safe distances from their ground forces. Commander Vextai was beginning to understand the elegant simplicity of a human strategy. By eliminating their communication capability, you've effectively neutralized their orbital fire support without engaging the ships directly. Exactly. And now the real beauty of our strategy begins to unfold. Sarah's tactical display shifted to show new information about Zephyrian force disposition. With their orbital assets unable to provide support and their ground-based logistics failing, Zephyrian forces are beginning to experience what we call cascade degradation. The scope feeds showed increasingly desperate activity throughout Zephyrian positions. Units that had been maintaining assault positions were now being diverted to address equipment failures. Command elements were attempting to coordinate without communication systems. Supply lines were disrupting due to infrastructure damage that appeared to be random mechanical failures. They're adapting, General Karath observed, but slowly and without coordination. Each unit is addressing problems individually rather than implementing unified solutions. Which brings us to Phase 4, Sarah announced. Now that we've disrupted their organization and eliminated their technological advantages, it's time for human soldiers to do what we do best, direct engagement on our terms. The scope feeds suddenly showed human assault teams emerging from concealed positions throughout the battlefield. These weren't the careful, methodical movements of the sniper teams, but rapid, aggressive advances that took advantage of Zephyrian confusion. Human close-quarters combat tactics emphasize speed, aggression, and psychological impact, Sarah explained as her soldiers began engaging confused Zephyrian units. While galactic warfare has evolved toward long-range energy exchanges, humans have maintained expertise in direct physical engagement. Through multiple feeds, the war room could observe human soldiers using tactics that seemed primitive by galactic standards, but proved devastatingly effective against disorganized opponents. Chemical explosives created chaos in Zephyrian formations. Kinetic weapons punched through personal shields designed to stop energy attacks. And, most importantly, human units operated with independent initiative that allowed them to exploit opportunities as they developed. Your soldiers are outnumbered 50-1, Zara protested, watching human teams engage much larger Zephyrian formations. Numbers only matter if you can coordinate them effectively, Sarah replied. Zephyrian soldiers are individually superior to humans in almost every measurable way. Stronger, faster, better equipped. But they're trained to fight as part of coordinated formations under direct command authority. She highlighted several engagement zones on her display. Without that coordination, they're just individual soldiers trying to follow outdated orders while under attack by opponents who adapt constantly to changing conditions. Webb's voice interrupted from his position. Colonel, Zephyrian forces in Sector 7 are attempting to establish a rally point. Looks like some of their officers are trying to restore command structure. Understood, Sergeant. All sniper teams, priority targets are any emerging leadership elements. We need to prevent reorganization until our assault teams complete their objectives. The war room watched as human marksmen shifted their focus back to personnel targets, eliminating Zephyrian officers who attempted to restore order to their formations. It was brutal efficiency. Each shot eliminated not just an individual, but also any attempt to restore the command structure that Zephyrian tactics required. This is psychological warfare as much as physical combat, Sarah explained. Every time Zephyrian soldiers see their officers eliminated by invisible enemies, it reinforces their sense of helplessness and isolation. Commander Vextai found himself simultaneously horrified and impressed by the human approach to warfare. Colonel, your tactics are unlike anything in our military databases. You're not just defeating their forces, you're destroying their ability to function as a coordinated military unit. Humans learned early in our development that the most effective way to defeat a superior enemy is to force them to fight on your terms rather than their own, Sarah replied. The Zephyrians brought advanced technology and overwhelming numbers. We responded with unpredictability, adaptability, and tactics they never trained to counter. The orbital displays showed the 3 Zephyrian destroyers maintaining their positions, but unable to engage effectively without ground-based targeting data. Below them, Their ground forces were being systematically dismantled by an enemy that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. How long can your forces maintain this pace? General Karath asked, noting the intensity of human operations across multiple battlefield sectors. Sarah checked her tactical chronometer. Current engagement phase is sustainable for approximately 6 more hours. But by then, it won't matter. Zephyrian forces are already beginning to retreat to defensive positions while they await reinforcements that won't arrive in time to matter. She was right. Across the battlefield, Zephyrian units were withdrawing from their assault positions and establishing defensive perimeters while their commanders tried to understand what had gone wrong. The methodical advance that had been grinding through Kepler, 442B's defenses had been replaced by confused retreat. Phase 5 begins in 2 hours, Sarah announced, her expression showing the first signs of fatigue after hours of intense operations. That's when we demonstrate the final difference between human and galactic approaches to warfare. But even as she spoke, long-range sensors detected new signatures approaching the system. Zephyrian reinforcements were en route, and they would arrive with full knowledge of what had happened to the initial assault force. Hashtag primitive weapons, they said, until a human sniper entered the room. Hashtag Part 5. The Galactic Council's war room buzzed with controlled tension as long-range sensors confirmed what everyone feared. A massive Zephyrian reinforcement fleet was approaching Kepler, 442B. The lead elements would arrive in just over 4 hours, and their composition suggested that Zephyrian High Command had learned from the devastating losses of their initial assault force. Sensor analysis complete, Lieutenant Zara reported, her blue scales flickering with stress patterns. 12 heavy cruisers, 47 destroyers, and over 300 support vessels. Total troop strength estimated at 2.8 million soldiers. Commander Vextai studied the tactical projections with growing concern. Colonel Chun, your forces have achieved remarkable success against the initial Zephyrian assault, but these reinforcements represent a 20-fold increase in enemy strength. Surely evacuation is the only viable option. Sarah's image appeared unchanged despite the dire intelligence report. She stood in what appeared to be a hastily constructed command center, surrounded by holographic displays showing human force dispositions across Kepler, 442B. Behind her, explosions continued to light the sky, but they seemed more distant now, less immediate. Commander, you're absolutely right about the mathematical disadvantage, Sarah replied. But you're still thinking in terms of conventional warfare. The Zephyrian reinforcements are coming to engage an enemy that no longer exists. She gestured to her tactical displays, which showed a dramatically transformed battlefield. Over the past 6 hours, we've eliminated the original Zephyrian command structure, crippled their supply lines, neutralized their orbital fire support, and forced their remaining ground forces into defensive positions. But more importantly, we've gathered intelligence on their tactics, technology, and operational procedures. Webb's voice crackled through the communication system from a new position. Colonel, Zephyrian forces in sectors 4 through 9 have completely withdrawn to defensive perimeters. They're not even attempting to maintain their original assault objectives. Confirmed, Sergeant. Phase 5 is now in effect. All teams implement dispersal protocol and transition to guerrilla operations. The scope feeds suddenly showed human soldiers throughout the battlefield beginning rapid relocations. But instead of consolidating into defensive positions as Galactic Doctrine would suggest, they were spreading out into smaller teams and disappearing into terrain features that seemed incapable of concealing a single soldier, much less entire units. I don't understand, General Karath admitted, his reptilian features showing confusion. Your forces are dispersing just as overwhelming reinforcements approach. This seems contrary to every principle of defensive warfare. Sarah's expression carried that same unsettling confidence that had marked her communications throughout the operation. General, you're assuming we intend to fight a defensive battle. Humans learned long ago that when faced with overwhelming force, the solution isn't to fight harder, it's to fight smarter. She highlighted sections of her tactical display, showing human team positions. For the past 6 hours, we've been gathering detailed intelligence on Zephyrian operational procedures. We know their communication protocols, their supply requirements, their maintenance schedules, and their response patterns. Most importantly, we know their weaknesses. But intelligence alone won't stop 2.8 million soldiers, protested Zura, her tentacles writhing with agitation. You're absolutely right, Sarah agreed. Which is why we're not going to fight 2.8 million soldiers. We're going to make them fight themselves. The war room fell silent as the implications of her words settled over the assembled officers. Commander Vextai leaned forward, his compound eyes focusing intently on the transmission. Explain, he commanded. Sarah's tactical display shifted to show detailed analysis of the approaching Zephyrian fleet. The reinforcement force is operating under emergency protocols due to the unprecedented losses suffered by their initial assault. They're bringing massive firepower and overwhelming troop strength, but they're also bringing the same rigid hierarchical command structure that we've already proven vulnerable to disruption. She pointed to specific vessels in the approaching fleet. Fleet Admiral Kethvar is commanding from the dreadnought Inevitable Conquest. His entire operational plan is based on establishing orbital supremacy and coordinating massive ground assaults through centralized command systems. Webb's voice provided additional context. Colonel, we've identified 47 critical communication relays throughout their fleet formation. Same basic design as the ground-based systems we've already engaged. Excellent, Sergeant. Begin Phase 5 target acquisition. Priority targets are fleet coordination systems. The scope feeds showed human marksmen repositioning to engage targets that seemed impossible even by their standards. The approaching Zephyrian fleet was still hours away from optimal range, yet human soldiers were already calculating firing solutions for orbital targets. Colonel, Commander Vextai interrupted, surely you cannot be suggesting that ground-based kinetic weapons can engage targets in deep space. Not deep space, Sarah corrected. The Zephyrian fleet will need to achieve close orbital insertion to coordinate with their ground forces. And when they do, they'll be vulnerable to the same tactics we've used throughout this operation. She gestured to a holographic projection showing orbital mechanics around Kepler 442b. Zephyrian doctrine requires fleet command vessels to maintain specific orbital positions for optimal communication with ground elements. Those positions are predictable, and the physics of orbital mechanics means their movement patterns follow precise mathematical trajectories. General Karath studied the projections with growing amazement. You're planning to engage starships with individual small arms fire, not individual weapons, Sarah clarified. Coordinated strikes using principles we've refined over 8 hours of continuous operations. But this time we're not just disrupting their command structure. We're turning their own reinforcements against each other. The tactical display showed new information about the Zephyrian fleet's composition. Mixed in with the military vessels were hundreds of automated supply ships, maintenance platforms, and support craft, all controlled by centralized computer systems that relied on constant communication with Fleet Command. By disrupting Fleet Command communications at precisely the right moment, Sarah explained, we can trigger automated safety protocols that will cause their own support vessels to interfere with military operations. Webb's voice carried a note of anticipation. Colonel, I got firing solutions on 12 primary fleet communication nodes. Range will be extreme, but atmospheric conditions are optimal due to the thermal effect from their engine emissions. Understood, Sergeant. All teams report ready status for orbital engagement. The war room watched in fascination as 43 human marksmen prepared to attempt what every military computer in the galaxy calculated as impossible, engaging orbital targets with ground-based kinetic weapons. The key, Sarah explained, is timing and target selection. Zephyrian fleet formations rely on precise coordination between hundreds of vessels. Disrupting communication at the moment they begin ground assault coordination will trigger cascading failures throughout their operational network. Commander Vextai found himself struggling to comprehend the audacity of the human strategy. Colonel, even if you successfully disrupt their communications, they still possess overwhelming firepower. A single dreadnought could devastate this entire planet. True, Sarah acknowledged. But a dreadnought that can't communicate with its support fleet, can't coordinate with ground forces, and can't distinguish between allied and enemy signals becomes a liability rather than an asset. The approaching Zephyrian fleet began its final approach to Kepler 442b, massive vessels decelerating from interstellar velocities with displays of power that dwarfed anything in the galactic arsenal. Their formation was perfect, their coordination flawless, and their confidence absolute. Fleet Admiral Kethvar is initiating ground assault coordination protocols, Webb reported. Communication arrays are powering up for maximum signal strength. Perfect, Sarah replied. All teams prepare for synchronized orbital engagement. Remember, we only get one chance at this. After the first shots, they'll know we can reach them. The scope feeds showed human marksmen making final adjustments to weapons that had been modified far beyond their original specifications. These weren't standard rifles anymore. They were precision instruments calibrated for engagements that challenged the fundamental assumptions of modern warfare. Firing solution confirmed, Webb announced. Target acquisition complete on Fleet Admiral Kethvar's primary command communication array. Through a scope, the war room could see the massive dreadnought in orbit above them. The vessel was so large that it appeared to block out a significant portion of the sky, and its communication arrays were clearly visible as they rotated to optimize contact with ground forces. All teams report ready, Sarah announced. Commence Phase 5 orbital engagement on my mark. The moment stretched endlessly as human soldiers prepared to attempt what galactic military science considered impossible. Around them, the remnants of the original Zephyrian force continued their confused retreat, unaware that their reinforcements were about to experience the same systematic dismantling that had destroyed their assault. Mark, Sarah commanded. 43 rifles fired simultaneously, their projectiles arcing up through Kepler 442b's atmosphere toward targets that represented the pinnacle of Zephyrian military technology. The war room watched through scope feeds as tungsten core rounds crossed the boundary between atmosphere and space, their trajectories calculated with precision that would challenge the most advanced targeting computers. The impacts were spectacular. Communication arrays designed to withstand meteor strikes and energy weapons fire shattered under kinetic impacts they were never designed to resist. Chain reactions propagated through the fleet's communication network as automated systems attempted to compensate for damaged nodes by rerouting through backup systems that were also being systematically eliminated. Direct hits on all primary targets, Webb reported with professional satisfaction. Fleet communication network is experiencing cascade failure. The war room displays showed the immediate effects as the Zephyrian fleet formation began experiencing coordination problems. Vessels that had been maintaining perfect formation started drifting from their assigned positions as their computer systems struggled to re-establish communication links. Now we wait, Sarah announced, checking her chronometer. Zephyrian automated safety protocols will activate in approximately 4 minutes. Commander Vextai watched the orbital display with fascination as the massive fleet began showing signs of systemic dysfunction. Colonel, their vessels are beginning to maneuver erratically. Exactly as predicted, Sarah replied. Zephyrian safety protocols are designed to prevent collisions and friendly fire incidents when communication systems fail. But those same protocols become weapons against them when activated during complex fleet maneuvers. The effects cascaded rapidly through the Zephyrian formation. Supply vessels automatically moved to safe distances when they lost contact with fleet command. Maintenance platforms activated emergency protocols that caused them to recall all deployed repair craft. Support vessels began broadcasting distress signals that interfered with military communication attempts. Within 30 minutes, the overwhelming Zephyrian reinforcement fleet had been reduced to hundreds of individual vessels operating under emergency protocols without coordination or unified command. Their massive firepower remained intact, but their ability to use it effectively had been eliminated by the simple expedient of shooting their communication systems with primitive kinetic weapons. Fleet Admiral Kethvar is attempting to restore communication using short-range systems, Webb observed. But the automated interference from his own support fleet is preventing effective signal propagation. Sarah nodded with satisfaction. The beauty of turning enemy systems against themselves is that every attempt to solve the problem makes it worse. The more they try to restore communications, the more their automated safety systems interfere with the process. The war room watched as the mighty Zephyrian fleet began a confused withdrawal to safe distance, while their commanders attempted to understand what had happened. Below them, ground forces that had been preparing for massive reinforcement found themselves abandoned by orbital assets that couldn't coordinate with surface operations. Colonel Chun, Commander Vextai, said slowly, "Your forces have achieved something unprecedented in galactic military history. You've defeated a technologically superior enemy using weapons and tactics that our computers classified as obsolete." Sarah's image smiled, that same unsettling expression that had marked her communications throughout the operation. "Commander, humans learned something important during our early development that seems to have been forgotten by galactic civilization. The most advanced technology in the universe is worthless if you don't know how to use it creatively." She gestured toward her tactical displays, which showed Zephyrian forces throughout the system beginning organized withdrawals as their command structures attempted to regroup and develop new strategies. "The Zephyrians will return," she continued, "but they'll come with different tactics designed to counter human capabilities. And when they do, we'll be ready with new approaches they haven't anticipated." "How?" asked General Karath, his voice carrying genuine curiosity rather than skepticism. Sarah's smile widened. "Because while they'll be developing technology to counter the tactics we use today, we'll be inventing entirely new ways to fight that they haven't imagined yet. That's the real advantage humans bring to galactic civilization. Not superior weapons or advanced technology, but the ability to adapt, improvise, and find solutions that nobody else considers possible." The transmission began to fade as Sarah prepared to coordinate the complex logistics of victory. "Commanders, Kepler 442b is secure. We'll send a full tactical analysis within 24 hours, but I suspect you'll find that human military methods offer some interesting perspectives on contemporary warfare." As the communication ended, the war room fell into contemplative silence. Around them, displays showed the systematic withdrawal of Zephyrian forces and the impossible victory the human soldiers had achieved using weapons their enemies had dismissed as primitive. Commander Vextai looked around the chamber at officers representing dozens of species and thousands of years of military evolution. "Perhaps," he said quietly, "it's time we reconsidered our assumptions about primitive weapons." In the distance, 43 human marksmen were already cleaning their rifles and preparing for the next impossible challenge, secure in the knowledge that there was no problem that couldn't be solved with enough creativity, determination, and precisely placed kinetic energy.